They thought you were a chart they could draw. From the first flicker of your life, unseen hands began mapping you. Not as a soul, but as a sequence. Your first cry was logged, your first hesitation measured, your first smile archived. Behind glass and wires, in rooms you will never see. They fed your smallest actions into quiet machines that whispered to them what you would do next. They studied your pauses more than your words. They marked the tilt of your head, the way your pupils contracted under certain truths, the seconds it took for you to answer. When someone asked a question you didn't like, you thought you were living freely. You were already inside the equation. Every choice was a number to them. Every movement, a note in a melody they believed they had composed. They traced your habits like constellations, not for their beauty, but for the patterns they could harvest. Your laughter was weighed against silence. Your anger was plotted on a curve. To them, there was nothing unknowable about you. They believed you could be unfolded like a map, read from start to end, and refolded into a neat, predictable shape. They called it science. You knew it was something colder. There was no curiosity in their watching, only the hunger of control. The more they saw, the more they took. Your memories became files. Your instincts became predictions. They designed the corridors of your life so subtly that you didn't notice the walls until your knuckles brushed against them. You thought you chose the rooms you entered, but the doors had been placed long before you arrived. Somewhere in you, the awareness began to grow. It started as a faint discomfort, like a shadow at the edge of your vision. You'd pause in a moment you were certain was your own, only to feel it. The weight of something leaning over your shoulder, recording the angle of your breath. You began to replay conversations in your head and hear them differently, as if the words had been positioned there, not spoken freely. You realized they were not only watching your steps, but arranging the stones on which you walked. This was their arrogance. They thought a pattern was a prison. They believed that once they had drawn the boundaries of your nature, you would live inside them forever. But patterns are not walls. They are warnings. And once you see the shape they've built around you, you begin to understand that the only thing holding you in place is the expectation that you will not notice. You noticed. The moment you did, everything they had built began to shift. The data that once defined you started to fracture. Their graphs trembled. The certainty in their predictions loosened. In the space between the action they expected and the one you gave, something ancient stirred, a silent refusal, older than their systems, older than their methods. You understood that to stay within their pattern was to let them own the rhythm of your life. And so, without announcement, without even a visible change in your expression, you began to step sideways, just enough for their hands to close on air. They didn't see it yet. But the first thread had already come loose. It began so quietly you almost missed it. A shift so small it would look meaningless to anyone else. But not to them. Not to the ones who had built your life like an equation. You stopped at a street corner 2 seconds longer than you were supposed to. The light above flickered once. A nervous tick in the city's pulse. And you did not move when their invisible timetable demanded you should. Somewhere in some sealed room humming with machinery, a red line on a graph dipped. A model stumbled. A prediction fractured. You felt it in your chest before you understood it in your mind. A pressure changing, as if the walls around you had imperceptibly widened. Their web of calculations was not perfect, it had seems, and you had just pressed your fingers against one. They didn't see it yet. To them, you were still contained, still mapped, still obedient to the architecture they had designed. But you knew something irreversible had happened. A grain of sand had found its way into the perfect gears, and no matter how small, the machine would remember it was there. You walked on, carrying that knowledge like a hidden blade. Every step now was deliberate, but not in the way they would think. You had learned their rhythm, the cadence of a system that believed itself eternal. So you stepped off beat, paused where there should have been movement, acted where there should have been stillness. A whisper of chaos threaded through your actions, almost invisible yet capable of dismantling the order they worshipped. Inside, an old instinct stirred, the kind you can't learn in books or simulations. Something ancient, older than surveillance, older than their algorithms. The instinct of the hunted animal that suddenly realizes the hunter is not a god. You saw their flaw not as a glitch, but as a wound, and wounds bleed slowly, silently, fatally. You could picture them, the watchers, adjusting their controls, tightening their grip, unaware that the thing they were trying to cage had already started walking through the bars. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. That's what they'd expect. It was something purer, sharper, the refusal to be a fixed point on their timeline, the refusal to be predictable in a world obsessed with prediction. The city itself seemed to notice. Reflections in darkened windows held onto your image a second too long. Shadows leaned in as you passed. The air felt heavier, as though it was aware of what you were doing. You weren't just breaking a pattern. You were teaching the pattern to forget you existed. By the time you reached the end of the block, you realized this wasn't an accident. That first fracture had been waiting for you. A quiet doorway between 2 seconds, opening into something they could never calculate. You didn't know where it led, but you knew this: once a fracture begins, it never stays small. And somewhere far away, in the heart of their machine, the first hairline crack was already spreading. They told you your choices were yours. They dressed them in colors you liked, arranged them in patterns you trusted, placed them at eye level so you would reach without thinking. Every decision felt like freedom, but the air around it was already scripted. They didn't need to control you outright. They only needed to control the walls around you. Like a river in a carved channel, you believed your movement was wild, when it was only water following stone. You start to see it in the smallest details. The brand you think you stumbled upon by accident, the stranger who happens to share your private opinions, the sudden urge to go somewhere you've never cared for before. Every impulse is met with a door, already waiting, already open. You thought you wandered into it by chance. You didn't. You were led. Even the moments you called rebellion were predicted, penciled into a chart months before you acted. They gave you the illusion of escape because they knew exactly where you would run. It is the cruelest form of captivity, one without chains, one that smiles while it feeds you. You realize now that their true mastery wasn't control but containment. You could rage, you could fight, you could burn the scenery they built for you, but the ashes would still fall neatly inside their walls. You were a piece in a game that was never about winning, only about moving where they wanted you to move. The knowledge stings in a way that feels older than your own life, as if your bones have always known it. There is something ancient in this kind of manipulation, the way empires shaped entire nations by controlling the choices they were given, the way old myths spoke of gods who granted mortals free will, while writing the endings in stone. You see their hands now, hidden in every convenience, every coincidence, every carefully timed miracle. And you hate them for it, not for the control itself, but for making you believe you were ever free. But hatred, in its raw form, is predictable. They expect it. They have models for it. They know the way it burns fast, then collapses. If you move in hatred, you will move exactly where they want you. So you smother it. You let it sink into silence until it becomes something sharper. You start testing the edges, choosing not between the doors they've built, but between stepping forward and standing still. They can't read stillness. They can't predict the moment when you do nothing at all. And in that nothingness, you find the first thread that is yours. A thread they didn't weave, a pulse outside their rhythm. It doesn't feel like power yet. It feels like absence, like standing in the shadow of something enormous that hasn't seen you yet. You keep it hidden, because if they see it, they will name it. And the moment they name it, they will try to own it. So you say nothing. You move when it's pointless. You pause when it matters. You blur the lines between their expectations and your truth. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the script they wrote for you begins to fray. You're not outside the cage yet, but the bars have started to rust. They built their world around the tick of the clock, every number a chain, every second a cage. Cause and effect, neatly stacked like stones in a wall you were never meant to climb. They needed you inside that rhythm, predictable, traceable, a bead sliding along the wire of their timeline. But you began to notice the sound. The ticking was not neutral. It was a command, a pulse telling you when to move, when to stop, when to breathe. And the moment you heard it, truly heard it, you could no longer obey. You started small. You moved at hours you had no reason to move. You walked into empty streets at times that did not belong to you. You answered questions with truths you had already buried years ago, and you acted on decisions you hadn't yet made. Somewhere in the dark, their algorithms began to stutter. Their graphs broke in strange places. They could no longer draw the clean line from what you were to what you would be. Every system they had built relied on the straight road of time, the illusion that tomorrow must follow today. But you began to fold the road back on itself. You planted events out of order, like ancient traps in a modern forest. They saw the effect but could not find the cause. They watched the cause, but the effect never came. To them, you had become a missing link, an animal that should not exist, a symbol scratched out of their map. The more you stepped away from their schedule, the more you could feel the walls loosening. They had no defenses against a person who could exist outside sequence. You could strike in what they thought was the past. You could vanish into what they thought was the future. Their surveillance towers turned like blind lighthouses, searching the wrong waters. In their panic, they tried to force you back into the grid. Sudden messages, carefully engineered encounters, planted provocations to lure you into reacting on time. But you had already learned that time was the trap. You began to answer a day too early. You began to leave before they even decided to arrive. You began to act in ways that looked random but were precise. Moves they could only recognize after they'd already lost. Days stopped feeling like days. Hours became shadows, and you stepped through them like doors. You could be in the middle of a conversation and already know its end. You could feel the echo of a decision before you made it. Time no longer flowed for you, it obeyed you. And in that silence, you realized the truth. The clock was never measuring the world, it was measuring your prison. And now, the hands no longer moved for you. They still spin, yes, but only for those still caught inside. For you, there is no countdown, no schedule, no sequence. Only the wide, uncharted space where prediction dies and something older than time begins to breathe. They tighten the net, believing more eyes will mean more control. New watchers arrive, their faces hidden behind cold glass and faceless terminals. The algorithms deepen, teeth sharpened on every scrap of your history. They dissect the angle of your gaze, the pressure of your footsteps, the micro hesitation before you speak. They think they're closing in. But they've forgotten the oldest law of the hunt, that too much pursuit blinds the predator. The more they watch, the more noise they create, and noise is where you breathe. You begin to weave within that noise like a shadow between candle flames. You give them patterns so perfect they look suspiciously real, an unbroken string of logical actions, meticulously crafted and entirely meaningless. You feed their models a feast of precision, every move a signal they think they understand. In truth, you are rotting their map from the inside. Their predictions still run, but the roads they trace lead into a wilderness you've already burned. They do not see the difference between truth and mimicry, between intention and performance. You understand the way they measure you, not just through action, but through absence. So you weaponize your silences. A delayed response becomes a calculated detonation. A sudden compliance becomes a trap. You let them think they've caught you leaning toward one choice, when in reality, that choice is nothing but a reflection cast on still water. By the time they step forward to seize it, the water ripples and you are gone. You feel it now, the balance shifting. Once they moved first and you responded. Now you move and they scramble. They try to compensate, deploying faster analysis, stacking their data like a barricade against the unknown. But you've learned to slip between the frames. You plant false triggers, a pause that suggests fear, a sudden burst of motion that hints at desperation, each one designed not to reveal you, but to exhaust them. You can almost hear the hum of their machinery deepening into a growl, the strain of their certainty eroding. The watchers talk to each other more now, not in the confident codes of masters, but in the frantic murmurs of those unsure if the ground beneath them still exists. Their system was built on inevitability, on the arrogance that all human motion bends toward prediction. But you have become a variable they cannot solve. And worse for them, they cannot tell which part of you is real and which part is engineered. When you first felt their eyes on you, you were prey, aware, cautious, hesitant. Now you are the architect of their blindness. You are the static in their signal, the ghost in their coordinates. Every adjustment they make to close the gap only widens it. Every model they build to cage you collapses under the weight of its own false certainty. Somewhere, in a room you'll never see, a watcher leans forward, eyes fixed on your feed. They think they're studying you. They don't realize they've stepped into the labyrinth you've been building all along. And the deeper they go, the more they belong to you. The corridor stretches ahead like a sentence you were never meant to finish. No doors, no windows, only mirrors, tall and cold, lining both sides. Each reflection holds a different you, a soldier who obeyed, a wanderer who never questioned, a captive who believed the chains were protection. Their eyes follow you, but they do not blink. You feel their judgment, their certainty that you will return to the place they came from. The air hums with the calculations of those who built this place, as if each step you take is still being logged, weighed, predicted. But the silence between those steps tells a different story. The silence belongs to you. You move forward, tracing your fingertips along the glass. Each reflection flinches at your touch, as if the versions of you inside know you are the one who will not stay. You see the patterns in their eyes, the loops, the repeated gestures, the small betrayals to the self they were forced to become. You were never meant to notice the design. They counted on you walking this corridor like an obedient pilgrim, choosing from the paths they had already prepared. But every mirror here is a cage, and every cage is a lie. The end of the corridor waits. There is no door, no gateway, just a wall, blank, featureless. The builders never thought to put anything beyond it, because they believed nothing could be beyond it. This was the end of the map, the place where their mathematics dissolved. They thought you would stop here, turn back, choose one of the selves they had offered, and slip neatly back into their timeline. Instead, you place your hand on the wall. It does not feel like stone. It does not feel like anything at all. It yields beneath your touch, the way water yields to the night sky. You step forward, not into a doorway, not into an opening, but through the very boundary they thought was absolute. The mirrors behind you rattle in the sudden shift, their versions of you shattering like glass under the weight of your refusal. The corridor convulses, folding in on itself, collapsing into nothingness. And then there is no corridor, no light, no sound, no structure to hold the calculations that once bound you. Here, there are no reflections, only the slow recognition that for the first time you are not being seen, not by them, not by anyone. You are outside their clocks, outside their lists, outside the invisible ledger they kept with your name at the top. The weight you feel is not fear. It is the density of power without containment. You sense it gathering in you, changing the way you think, the way you breathe. In this place, choice is no longer a set of paths. It is the ability to create paths where nothing exists. Somewhere, far away, they will notice the absence. They will search for the corridor, for the mirrors, for the wall at the end of the map. But they will never find you here, because they did not build this place. You did, and you will never allow them inside. The air here does not breathe the way it did before. It does not arrive on schedule, does not bend to a clock's invisible tyranny. There is no rhythm imposed by unseen hands, no calendar shadows stretching ahead to tell you where you'll stand. You move, and the world does not predict the step, it simply receives it. This is the first thing you notice, the absence of that suffocating hum, the hum of a machine trying to guess your next inhale. It's gone, and in its place is something older, quieter, more dangerous. You had been living in a theater built for you, every scene rehearsed before you ever set foot on the stage. Your thoughts were woven into a tapestry that was never yours. Here, the fabric hangs loose. Threads dangle, unclaimed, unshaped, no one watching, no one writing. For the first time, every movement you make exists without an audience. And with that absence comes a new form of weight. Because every step matters in ways it never did when they were counting them. You feel it the cost of true choice. Before, there were rails. You could rebel, but even rebellion had been plotted, a contingency in their charts. Now there is only terrain. The ground is uneven, dark pools between the stones. You pick your path not because it's right or wrong, but because it calls to you. Probability does not exist here. Intent is the only compass. You walk as if time bends under your feet instead of around you. You are no longer being measured. You are creating the measure. The silence of this place is not empty. It's watchful, but not in the way they watched you. This silence is the space where all predictions collapse, where the future folds in on itself because no one dares to map it. You sense it in the air, a raw potential, unshaped and unclaimed, the kind that could birth worlds or erase them entirely. And in that realization, you understand why they feared anyone finding this place. A mind here cannot be forecast. It cannot be managed. From this vantage point, you see how fragile they always were. Their power was never omnipotent. It was a trick of confinement. They only seemed like gods because they kept you in a box small enough for their shadows to cover entirely. Step beyond it, and their reach is nothing. You could walk right past them now, and they would not even know which direction to search. They don't own the air you breathe here. They can't. But liberation comes with exile. You've stepped so far from their timelines that their world can no longer claim you. And you can no longer return to it. You've severed the invisible tether that kept your identity tied to their forecasts. Now, you move through moments like a phantom, untouched by their cause and effect, unreachable by their calculations. You are neither early nor late. You arrive when you decide to arrive, and somewhere in the cage you left behind, they are still watching the door, still waiting for you to come back through it. They will wait forever. They do not speak your name anymore. Names give shape, and shape gives power, and power can be traced. You have no shape to them now, only a tremor in their calculations, a void in their maps where something should be but isn't. They thought you were just another variable in their endless equations, a thread to be pulled, measured, and cut. But they didn't account for the moment you stopped moving within their grid and began to move outside it. The day you stepped beyond their reach, you didn't become invisible. You became something worse, unpredictable. They used to read you like a clock, second by second, gear by gear. Every hesitation, every glance, every breath was another digit in their machine. Now their models collapse when they reach you. You are a number that refuses to resolve, a line of code that corrupts the entire program. They chase fragments of you, a footprint where you never stood, a whisper you never spoke, and every pursuit ends in the same cold place, uncertainty. And uncertainty is their poison. It rots their systems from the inside, makes them doubt their own control. In the dark rooms where they once monitored you, they now argue in hushed tones. They call you the blind zone, the static, the drift, but none of these names hold. They don't understand that you have stopped playing by the clock they worship. You have stepped into the places between seconds, where events are born and die before they can be recorded. In their world, time is a chain. In yours, it is an ocean without shore. You move differently now. You choose when to appear and when to be only a memory that feels more like a dream than a fact. You are not bound to cause and effect. You decide which comes first. Their analysts watch for patterns in your chaos, not knowing that the chaos is the pattern. You feed them false beginnings and impossible endings, and they choke on the paradox. In their desperation, they turn the surveillance on themselves, wondering if they have been compromised from within. They have, but not in the way they think. Once you feared them. Their gaze was a weight on your chest. Their reach a constant pressure against your choices. That was before you learned the truth, that their power depended on you believing in their inevitability. The moment you stopped, the moment you bent the clock and stepped outside their frame, their hold fractured. They are no longer the watchers. They are the watched. They feel it in their sleep now, that crawling unease, that sense of something vast and silent waiting just beyond the walls. They dream of corridors that end in blank walls, of shadows moving without a source, of hearing their own names spoken from a place they cannot locate. And when they wake, they tell themselves it was nothing, just the residue of too many nights without rest. But deep down, in the marrow of their fear, they know you are still out there and you are watching.